Boston, March 1770. The streets are crowded. Merchants shout in the markets. Ships unload cargo in the harbor. But something in the city feels different. People whisper in taverns. Arguments break out in the streets. Soldiers patrol with muskets. The tension between the colonists and the British Army is growing every day. Taxes, protests, anger, all of it building slowly, like pressure inside a sealed container. Most people in Boston do not yet realize how close they are to something historic, because within only a few years, this tension will explode into war. But on this day, the conflict is still just beginning. By the late 1700s, Boston has become one of the most important cities in the American colonies. Around 16,000 people live within the small but crowded town, making it a center of commerce, politics, and maritime trade. Its busy harbor is filled with ships arriving from Britain, the Caribbean, and other parts of the Atlantic world. Every day, dock workers unload cargo, barrels of sugar, tea, molasses, cloth, tools, and spices that will be sold throughout the colonies. Narrow streets wind through tightly packed rows of wooden houses, taverns, shops, and warehouses. The sound of hammering from shipyards mixes with the noise of merchants bargaining in open markets. Sailors walk the docks, craftsmen work in small workshops, and farmers arrive from nearby villages, bringing food to sell in the town square. But beneath this busy daily life, Boston is becoming a place of growing political frustration. Many colonists feel that decisions affecting their lives are being made far away in London by a government that does not represent them. Debates about rights, taxes, and authority begin appearing in newspapers, taverns, and public meetings. The city still functions like a normal colonial port, but the mood is changing. Boston is becoming restless. After years of costly wars, the British Empire finds itself facing enormous financial pressure. The recent conflict, known as the 7 Years' War, had expanded Britain's territory, but also left the government deeply in debt. Leaders in London believe the American colonies should help pay for the empire's defense. From their perspective, British troops are protecting colonial lands, trade routes, and settlements. Asking the colonies to contribute financially seems reasonable. But in the American colonies, the situation feels very different. In 1765, Parliament introduces the Stamp Act, requiring colonists to purchase special stamped paper for newspapers, legal documents, licenses, and many everyday transactions. For many colonists, this law represents something more than just a tax. It represents control. The colonists have no representatives in the British Parliament. They cannot vote on these laws, yet they are expected to obey them. Very quickly, resistance spreads. Crowds gather in Boston streets. Merchants organize boycotts of British goods. Political groups form to oppose the new policies. A powerful slogan begins to appear in speeches and newspapers: "No taxation without representation." And with each new law passed by Parliament, the anger inside Boston grows stronger. By the late 1760s, the British government becomes increasingly worried about the growing unrest in the American colonies. Boston, in particular, has gained a reputation as one of the most rebellious cities in North America. Protests against taxes and British authority appear regularly, and colonial leaders openly criticize decisions made in London. In response, Britain sends several regiments of soldiers to the city. In 1768, British troops begin arriving by ship into the busy harbor of Boston. Red-coated soldiers march through the narrow streets, muskets on their shoulders, drums beating as they move toward their assigned posts. For British officials, the purpose is simple: restore order and enforce the laws of the Crown. But for many colonists, the sight of soldiers patrolling their streets feels deeply unsettling. Boston is not a battlefield. It is a civilian town. Yet now armed troops stand guard outside government buildings, customs offices, and public squares. Barracks are limited, so some soldiers must find lodging among the townspeople themselves. Taverns, warehouses, and rented buildings become temporary quarters. This arrangement only increases friction between civilians and soldiers. Arguments begin appearing more frequently in markets and taverns. Local workers resent soldiers taking extra jobs to earn money. Insults are exchanged in the streets. Small confrontations become common. The presence of the army was meant to control unrest. Instead, it slowly pushes the city closer to open conflict. By the late 1760s, Boston is no longer just a busy colonial port. It has become a city divided by politics, loyalty, and growing mistrust. On one side are colonists who still support British authority. Many merchants depend on trade with the British Empire, and some officials believe that maintaining order and loyalty to the Crown is the only way to protect stability in the colonies. But on the other side, a powerful movement is beginning to grow. A group of colonists who believe the British government has gone too far. They argue that the colonies are being taxed and controlled by a parliament thousands of miles away, a government in which they have no voice. Meetings begin taking place in taverns and town halls. Pamphlets criticizing British policies circulate through the streets. Public speeches attract large crowds. One of the most influential voices in this growing resistance is Samuel Adams. Adams and other colonial leaders begin organizing networks of communication between towns, spreading news about British actions and encouraging colonists to resist new laws. Boycotts of British goods spread across the city. Merchants refuse certain imports. Crowds sometimes gather outside shops that continue selling British products. Meanwhile, British officials grow increasingly concerned. From their perspective, Boston is becoming unstable, a place where protests could quickly turn into rebellion. To maintain order, more British soldiers remain stationed in the city, but their presence only deepens the divide. For many colonists, the red-coated soldiers patrolling the streets feel less like protectors and more like occupiers. By the late 1760s and early 1770s, everyday life in Boston begins to feel different. The city still functions as a busy colonial port. Ships arrive in the harbor, merchants sell goods in crowded markets, and craftsmen work in small shops along narrow streets. But everywhere you look, there are reminders that something has changed. British soldiers are now a constant presence. Red-coated troops stand guard near government buildings. Patrols move through the streets. Muskets rest on their shoulders as they watch the crowds passing by. For many colonists, this feels deeply uncomfortable. Boston is their home, yet soldiers of the British Crown now monitor the city's activity. In taverns and meeting houses, conversations increasingly revolve around politics. People argue about taxes, authority, and the rights of the colonies. Newspapers publish sharp criticism of British rule. Pamphlets circulate quickly from hand to hand. Meanwhile, the relationship between civilians and soldiers continues to worsen. Arguments begin with insults. Small fights break out in alleyways. Sometimes, crowds gather simply to shout at soldiers. Each encounter increases the hostility between the two sides. Boston still looks like a normal city, but beneath the surface, the tension keeps rising. The evening of March 5th, 1770, begins like many cold nights in Boston. Snow covers parts of the narrow streets, and small groups of workers, sailors, and apprentices move between taverns and homes after a long day. But tension in the city has been building for months, and even ordinary encounters between colonists and British soldiers often turned into arguments. Near the Custom House, a British soldier stands guard outside the building that holds valuable tax revenues collected by the Crown. At first, only a few colonists approach him. They shout insults, accusing the soldiers of occupying their city. More people begin to gather, apprentices, dock workers, sailors from nearby ships. The crowd grows louder. Snowballs begin flying through the air. Some contain small stones or pieces of ice. The soldier calls for help. Soon, several more British soldiers arrive to reinforce the guard. Now two tense groups face each other in the dim winter street. The crowd presses closer. Voices shout from every direction. No one seems able to control the situation. Then suddenly, a gunshot cracks through the night. The confrontation in the street grows more chaotic with every passing second. The crowd surrounding the British soldiers becomes larger and louder. Dozens of colonists gather in front of the guard post outside the Custom House. Some shout insults. Others throw snowballs packed with ice, pieces of wood, and small stones. The soldiers stand in a tense line, muskets in their hands, trying to hold their position while the shouting continues. No one seems fully in control anymore. Witnesses later describe the scene as confusing and frightening. People are pushing forward. Voices overlap. Someone yells for the soldiers to fire. Others shout for the crowd to back away. Then suddenly, a gunshot cracks through the cold night air. Within seconds, more shots follow. Smoke from the muskets fills the street. When the noise finally fades, several men are lying on the ground. Some are wounded. Others are already dying. Among them is Crispus Attucks, a sailor and dock worker who becomes one of the first people killed during the confrontation. By the end of the night, 5 colonists will die from their injuries. News of the shooting spreads across Boston within hours. Crowds gather in shock and anger. For many colonists, the event becomes powerful evidence that British troops are a threat to the people they are supposed to protect. Almost immediately, Patriot leaders begin using the tragedy to rally public opinion against British rule. Pamphlets, speeches, and newspaper articles describe the incident as a brutal act of oppression. And although the American Revolution will not officially begin for several more years, the events of this night push the colonies one step closer to open rebellion. After the shooting on the streets of Boston, the city does not immediately fall into open war. But something important has changed. The trust between the colonists and the British authorities is now deeply damaged. News of the event spreads quickly beyond Boston. Riders carry reports to nearby towns, and newspapers across the colonies begin printing dramatic descriptions of what happened that night. Patriot leaders use the tragedy to rally support against British rule. Pamphlets and illustrations circulate widely, showing British soldiers firing into a crowd of unarmed colonists. These images fuel anger and strengthen the belief that the colonies are being treated unfairly. Public meetings grow larger. Political groups become more organized. Merchants renew boycotts of British goods. And conversations in taverns begin shifting from protest to something far more serious: independence. Over the next few years, tensions will only continue to rise. Events like the Boston Tea Party will deepen the conflict, and British authorities will respond with stricter control over the colonies. By 1775, arguments and protests will finally turn into open fighting. The American Revolution will begin, and many will look back at the streets of Boston in 1770 as one of the first sparks that helped ignite it. What you've just seen is a reconstruction of Boston in 1770, during the tense years leading up to the American Revolution. The streets, harbor, and atmosphere of colonial Boston were recreated using AI reconstruction technology, allowing us to visualize the city during the moment when the path toward revolution first became unavoidable.